fácil. Alexis, vaya mano y el remate a gol de Lacazette. 1-0 Arsenal, Lacazette. Marca el delantero francés.
This is Arsecast Extra.
Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra. As always with James from Gunnerblog. James, it is morning.
It is morning, isn't it?
Yep.
It was night and now it's morning.
Yeah, no refuting the fact that it is now morning. And we are recording and we are going to delve deep into the issues that involve this football club that we support. And it's making my heart hurt even thinking about it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Saturday against Southampton, I mean, I think we signed off our last podcast together almost saying surely. I felt the word that was used a lot was surely. Surely it will be better. Surely we will get this win at last. And maybe we were naive in that belief.
Maybe so. I texted you afterwards saying I thought it might be bad, but I didn't think it would be as bad as it was. And it was bad from a footballing point of view, but there were other things that happened during the day and in the game and in the context of the game, which also felt really bad. So we'll touch on those. And that's sort of about the reaction to the result and the way that, you know, we as fans are supposed to feel and the way that certainly I felt towards the end of the game and all that. But we'll delve into that in a little bit. But let's, for what it's worth, talk about the match and the way we set up. And, you know, this is a game that Unai Emery knew he had to win. He's aware he's under a great deal of pressure. He's playing a team that are 19th, or maybe they were bottom of the table when the game began. I can't quite remember, but you know, they're down there. They've only won 2 games all season. He played a back 3 or a back 5, however you want to look at it, which, you know, we've made the point before, in itself doesn't have to be a defensive setup. But the way that Unai Emery uses it almost always is, you know, the great Barcelona teams will play a 3-4-3. You can't say playing 3 at the back is defensive, you know, because of what they do and how they do it. But with Emery, it's almost always based out of fear. And that's what it felt like.
Yeah, I even think more recently in Arsenal history under Arsene Wenger, when we played a kind of 3-4-3, that was more adventurous when we had kind of Ozil and Alexis off of a striker. You know, theoretically, the idea of having wing backs bombing on and sort of stationed on the halfway line, getting forward and, you know, Ozil behind the strikers, there was stuff in that theoretically to like, but in practice it just never plays out like that for Unai Emery. And I do think when you look at him and you try and pinpoint sort of what it is about his Arsenal teams that is so problematic, you know, it is that inherent caution and it is that almost fear, I suppose, of our defensive vulnerability. It's like we haven't really been able to correct that vulnerability in any significant way, and the only way he seems to be able to think of doing it is by padding, by putting more numbers into that central area. You know, when you sort of take a long widescreen shot of any Arsenal match, the amount of sort of centre halves and fullbacks and defensive midfielders kind of packed into the width of the penalty area in our own half is always pretty striking, isn't it? It feels like it's about 6 or 7 players at any one time.
And I think before the game, you got an idea of what he was thinking and how sort of into his shell he has gone in terms of fear of the opposition when he's talking about Southampton as a team. You know, he's right to say they're better away from home than at home because they've only got a single point at home, but 7 points on the road, which doesn't make them, you know, Harlem Globetrotters or anything like it. But he was talking as if we were going to be playing a team that were rampant. And I think there was something interesting in what Aubameyang said after the game. You know, how we expected that this is how Southampton would play. It's almost self-defeating, you know, that the fear that Emery has in terms of how he sets up his team is transmitted to the players and they become afraid of teams that they shouldn't be afraid of, or that Arsenal Football Club shouldn't be afraid of. So I think it all just, you know, when we look at this stew that he's got bubbling, it's just based around Emery's own inner terror of doing anything that might be, dare I say, proactive or protagonistic, because all the time he's reacting to what he feels the threat of the opposition is going to be.
Yeah, and the more under pressure he is in some ways, the more kind of self-defeating it becomes, because the more he's inclined to think, well, I mustn't lose this game, you know, and so those kind of flaws become exacerbated. I think you saw that even in the second half. You know, Arsenal did go a bit more attacking. I know we'll come back to the beginning in a minute, but while I think of it, there was a moment in the second half where we had a pretty good attack. It might have been the one where Pepe struck the bar. And then Southampton broke on us, and it was the most animated I saw Emery in the whole game, because as they broke, suddenly this figure had been quite sort of subdued throughout the game, sort of burst into life and was desperately trying to claw his own players back into their half, you know, and sort of point, you know, get back. And I think you saw just in that flicker the kind of fear that underpins a lot of these decisions. Robbie Fowler was on Sky this weekend talking to Gary Neville about playing under Gerard Houllier, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, you know, Houllier used to give us so much preparation about the opposition that by the time the game came around, whoever it was, you sort of found yourself thinking, God, these guys are actually pretty good. And even if they sort of weren't, it sort of became self-defeating, you know, that the more you focus on an opposition, the kind of bigger you hype them up in your mind, and it almost impedes your confidence.
Absolutely. Like if your manager is telling you time and time again that the opposition are dangerous and you should be worried about everything that they do, of course. I mean, I don't want to bring up the Granit Xhaka scared thing again, but that's kind of what it comes to. You know, that's the mindset that gets into the players, and you can see in the way they play. You know, there's no confidence going forward, and it's just, I don't know if it's even worth discussing in any great level, because you know, I don't know how much longer this can go on or how long it should be allowed go on, but those are things we'll come to again. Look, they scored first, as opposition teams do, but they scored first having had maybe 4 or 5 attempts in the opening 10 minutes. Caught on a quick free kick. Do we need to, you know, analyse the goal in any way?
Well, it's not great, I've got to say. Like, it's a well-taken free kick, but I have watched it back a couple of times, and I know that we're sort of into this place of, you know, we can't really analyse individual players, but I think sort of in the interest of fairness, like, some of these players are really underperforming, and I do understand there are a lot of outside factors there, but in that particular instance, I thought the way Chambers and Luiz completely turned their back on the play at the award of the free kick is just so sort of schoolboy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we could have reacted better, and I think it's to do with organisation, it's awareness, it's even, you know, we've seen it in the past, haven't we, with stuff like throw-ins or short corners. You know, all of a sudden the opposition have a corner and we trot into what we think they're going to do. They're just going to like bang the ball into the box, and they take a short corner and we've got like one guy out there and they bypasses. We've seen it lots of times. Like there's this lack of awareness that the opposition might have some variety to the way that they play. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right to talk about how we could have done better on the goal. Our first shot was Lacazette's goal. That was our first shot. So it was efficient, I guess, if we're looking for some positives on the day.
Yeah. What minute did that come in? I forget.
About the 18th minute, I think.
Right. Okay.
Because I remember writing I think I wrote in the live blog, Arsenal haven't had a shot yet. And then, let's see. Yeah, 17th minute, Arsenal yet to have a shot. 18th minute, goal!
You need to write that more often. Yeah. Ideally.
Yeah, I should have written that. Well, it only works once per game.
Okay.
Arsenal yet to have 2 shots. See how that goes. I'm trying to remember the goal.
So it was like it was actually an okay-ish move. Guendouzi into Ozil.
It was,
found Tierney,
I
think. And then Aubameyang had a shot that was blocked, I think, and then it fell to Lacazette and a decent finish at the near post.
He's good at that, isn't he, on the turn with his back to goal, just finding either the precision or finding the power to get the ball in. So 1-1 after 18 minutes, and I'm just trying to think. Was there anything of real note in the first half beyond the fact that Southampton had more shots than we did? I don't know that we had much in the way of goal-scoring opportunities.
No, I mean, it was sufficiently bad for there to be a half-time change, which I think tells you about how the game was kind of drifting in that last 20 minutes of the first half.
So we did make a half-time change. I thought Chambers was in some ways unlucky to be the central defender who was sacrificed for that change, because Socrates had a very iffy first half and continued with a very iffy second half as well. So I felt a little bit for Chambers there, but he brought Pepe on, went to a back four, and I think for the first probably 10-15 minutes of the half we were definitely better. I know again we're talking about this as being something, improving from a low bar, but it looked better and the football was better, and there were some moments, there was a break, wasn't there, where Pepe could have played the ball in. There was a chance for Aubameyang, which was a little bit fortunate that it fell for him the way that it did, a clearance rebounded off somebody. So there were moments, Pepe hit the bar, of course, so there were moments in that spell after halftime. But, it was impossible to look at it and just think, why didn't you start like that? I know Pepe was late back. Didn't he mention that about Pepe, that
yes.
he was late back? So
he only arrived
maybe
late,
you don't start Pepe, but you've got Reece Nelson and you've got Martinelli, who can't have done any more in his other games to be given a chance in the Premier League, and particularly for a game that you need to win,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I haven't seen a replay back of that Pepe opportunity where he went for the pass rather than the shot. Was that a case of him making the wrong decision, or was it just bad execution?
Bad execution. I would say bad execution. I'll bring it up here again. Let me just see if I can find it on my...
Yeah, because I agree. I mean, I saw a lot of people afterwards saying he should have taken the shot on. I don't have a brilliant view. I'm behind that goal. But for me, it looked like a pass was... He had Ozil in support, didn't he?
Yeah, just outside him. And he should have made a better pass. Let me have a look at it here.
It speaks volumes. I saw Stuart McFarlane was stationed down in that corner, and Shkodran Mustafi was warming up there, and afterwards he very clearly sort of said to Stu, why didn't he shoot? And he sort of made like a shoot gesture with his hand. But,
oh my goodness. Yeah, it was a bad pass. He could have had a shot as well. He could have taken it on, particularly as it was on his left foot, And then, almost immediately Southampton went up the other end and had a chance. Yeah, like he should have gone on. Oh, he should have had a shot, yeah. He should have either played it earlier or had a shot.
Where Emery, kind of was spinning out on the touchline. And I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, I mean, look, that was a good chance. Obviously, he hit the bar, sort of did the right thing there, got it down into the ground, but just too much really, came up, hit the bar. And then, I would agree with you. That sort of 50 minutes after half-time, it was a little bit better. And the crowd were kind of energised by it. They were pleased to see Pepe on the field. I felt like Lacazette and Aubameyang sort of came to life a little bit and looked glad of a bit more support. Yeah,
I mean, you were there. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but, the Arsenal fans have gotten... I'm just looking at the chance here for Pepe. Oh, he's unlucky there, in fairness. The Arsenal fans have gotten a lot of stick lately for being crap fans and for being, whatever. But it felt to me like even though things weren't going particularly great, the crowd did its best to rouse the team at times. There was a lot of come on Arsenal when things weren't quite right during that second half. And I think the crowd did their bit, to be honest. Just curious what you think.
I mean, it was flat in the ground for big chunks of the game. Yeah. And I do understand that. The atmosphere wasn't brilliant, and Arsenal went behind pretty early. That does impinge on the atmosphere. But when they did go behind, there were people round me. I was sort of in the North Bank, lower, sort of who just started chants of, come on Arsenal, and we love you Arsenal, we do, I even heard, which I haven't heard that chant at a game for quite a long time, which is bizarre because it's a staple, really, but hasn't been that present this season. And in those moments, I felt real pride, actually. I think that, the fans who cheer their team on sort of irrespective of what's going on, even in adversity, there is something very admirable about that. And that's not intended as a criticism of people who don't, or people who want to boo, or whatever they want to do. But, in those moments, I think that's where supporters sort of really show their mettle. And I think I would agree with you that for the most part, Arsenal fans did their job. And it was the same at Leicester. I was at the Leicester game, and the away fans at that match, I think I said at the time, were fantastic throughout. And given what they're being served up, and given the conflict many of them must feel about, what positive results mean for this team, I think the nature of the support in the ground is very good.
Yeah. Okay. So the team had this spell of 15 minutes or so where it played better, and then it began to unravel. The momentum didn't last really. Southampton should have scored when Socrates, I don't know what the fuck he was doing, but he was caught on the ball in the box, and the cross, I think it was Cedric for Obafemi, and why he didn't just roll the ball across for him to tap it home, I don't know, but it was a hell of an escape. We should have been behind at that point. And then there's the penalty.
Yes.
Another penalty.
Yeah. Is that 4 or something like that?
5, I think.
5, wow. Plenty of penalties. What actually happens with this one? The ball swung in from the left, and it's Tierney's man's going across him. He just sort of grabs out at him, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's kind of soft. I think it's
soft, actually. But I think it's really soft.
It's the one they get given a lot, and we've had plenty of them given to us in the past. So Leno actually makes a save, which is amazing, because goalkeepers at Arsenal don't tend to do that when there's penalties. And they had a good VAR check, didn't they, to check if there was an offside before the penalty went in.
Is that what that was?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No, because I was in the ground. How am I supposed to know?
Oh, yeah, of course. Fuck you, paying supporter.
Yeah.
You don't count. It was a VAR check for offside.
Right.
And so there he is. He's saving it. There's nobody really following it in. Tierney puts his hands on his head, and Matteo Guendouzi sticks his arm up in the air. I don't know what he's appealing for. Something. He genuinely, he's on the edge of the box. The ball, there it is, saved. Tierney's like, oh no. And Guendouzi just sort of stands there in the D and puts his arm up and waves it in the general direction of the linesman. Offside or something.
Making the VAR signal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel for Leno a bit. If he finally goes the right way on one, finally saves one, and it couldn't have bounced more perfectly, could it? Out to, I mean, is it possible to attribute any blame there? I mean, is there any more he can do to get it away from the goal?
No, not really. I don't think you can really blame a goalkeeper. I think, he's done his bit. He's just unlucky that it's squirmed off him and straight back into the path of the. I think it is a little bit unfortunate. Yeah. And maybe we could have followed it in. Torreira and Socrates were there to follow it in, but...
Ward-Prowse has got like a 5-yard head start.
Of course, yeah. Like, I don't think you can really blame the Arsenal defenders either, because they can't make that up. And even if they get into the box, it'll be called back for encroachment under the new rules. So I think what's interesting about this and this goal is that immediately Southampton made 2 changes. They made 2 substitutions. So they brought off 2 forwards. First, Ings came off and Shane Long came on immediately after the penalty. And then a couple of minutes later, they took off Obafemi and they brought this guy, Gineppo. He came on. So the goal went in the 71st minute. Southampton make subs in the 73rd and 76th minutes. Arsenal, in desperate need of not just 1 goal, but 2 goals, wait until the 83rd minute to bring on Willock and Martinelli for Torreira and Bellerin. What do you make of that?
Honestly, I think it's because they're kids. And I think that he's not confident in them, basically. I think if that was Iwobi and Mkhitaryan sitting on the bench, they would have been on at half time. But I just don't think, if you look at his substitution patterns, I don't think he quite buys into these young players as much as he might make out.
Do you think there's some justification in that, in the way that the final few minutes played out? Because Southampton, it would be fair to say, had enough chances to win that game by a considerable margin, and their manager was upset that they didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a brilliant chance. Redmond went through on the left-hand side. I think one fell for Long in the box. They should have sealed it.
There was one where Gineppo just put it wide from 6 yards, 7 yards out, and he just put it wide. I don't quite know, what was going on there. But, Joe Willock cleared one off the line when the rest of our defenders were standing around looking at it. Willock was the guy getting back.
Well, I mean, for those substitutions and Emery's reluctance to use them, you can say, well, Willock saved a goal and Martinelli was heavily involved in the goal we did eventually score.
There you go.
But I think that you're sort of right. Emery was a bit cautious, surprise, surprise, to put them on, because I think he sensed and knew his team could not sort of withstand those attacking changes, that it would leave us too open and too vulnerable.
The attacking might of 19th place Southampton, how could we ever cope with anything like that?
Yeah. And the I suppose the scariest aspect of that is he was right. Like, he was correct in that those changes happened and we could have conceded 3-4 goals?
Sure, but there was something, obviously we were chasing the game, so you're having to push forward and having to take risks, and in part that comes back to the decisions that he made at the start of the game and the way that he chose to set his team out at the start. So, look, all in all, terrible game management from Unai Emery from start to finish, it would be fair to say.
I think this was Arsenal's worst performance, actually, this season.
Do you think?
I think it might be. I know there's a lot of contenders, but to be outshot to that degree by a team who are recovering slightly but have been really struggling, to have 60% of possession and make so little of it.
Yeah. I
really thought it was pretty poor. I know there are other contenders, but the shot thing is, I think the Watford game, the second half of the Watford game was so bad. I don't think the first half of the Watford game was quite as bad, but this was a consistently poor performance apart from that little 10-15 minute spell as we've talked about. But yeah, you're right, being outshot by the league's bottom side. Southampton apparently hadn't had more than 8 shots in a game, for their last, since last year or something. They've just been brutal. Did you see the tweet by David Wall, who's on Twitter @OneDavidWall? I'm going to send this to you now in the little chat doohickey here. Boom, boom, boom. And basically what he's done is he's looked at the shot differential in the Premier League. So basically it's the amount of shots that you take versus the amount of shots that you allow. Okay, and what's the difference between that, right? So let's say, for example, in the full season in 2009-2010, Arsenal's shot differential was 276, which meant we took 276 shots more than the opposition across our 38 games. And there are various numbers: 251 in 10-11, 244 in 11-12, 13-14, not a great season, 70, but it went back to 204, then 120, 134. Last season, shot differential 170. No, that was 17-18. Arsene Wenger's last season in charge. Unai Emery's first season in charge, minus 32, which means that over the course of our Premier League season, the opposition had 32 shots more than we did. And this season so far, it is minus 56. I mean, that is that's amazing. That is amazing. It's no accident. I've said before on here, Unai Emery's final season at Sevilla, no team had more shots against their goal than his Sevilla side in La Liga. So this is a feature of Unai Emery's management. It is not an accident. It is something that he is doing on purpose. That is not to defend it. It is not working, but
Why? I mean, no, hang on. When you say it's something he's doing on purpose, do you think he deliberately sets out to allow the opposition to have more shots than his teams? Or is it that his teams are set out or sent out in such a way that it just becomes self-perpetuating, that the opposition will have more shots because Emery's teams can't defend and don't prevent the opposition? I mean, he can't really say, this is what I want from my team, because that would be genuinely insane, right?
Yes, that would be genuinely insane. So I should probably qualify. I think, because if you look deeper into these numbers, and I have to credit Giant Gooner on Twitter, who's done this in the Arsenal Vision Discord channel. I was looking at this last night. The amount of shots, the scale of shots is obviously massive. The proportion of those shots that equate to what would be statistically termed good chances is smaller than other teams. So I think that Unai Emery, I mean, basically, because we can all see Unai Emery's Arsenal are bad, right? We can all see that. But trying to figure out specifically why they're bad and what it is he's trying to do is really difficult, I think. And the best I can come up with right now is that he knows our defence to be so vulnerable and has so much fear around that he almost says, well, I'm going to sit off and let the opposition have the ball 30 yards out. They can have it there. And I'm going to protect the penalty box as far as I possibly can. And if they take shots from 30 yards, 25 yards, they're welcome to them. But I'm going to defend the 18-yard line. Now, of course, it doesn't pan out like that, because we end up under huge pressure, making mistakes, conceding penalties, as we said earlier in the show.
Yeah.
And also, when we do go forward, getting caught on the break. So it is not a strategy that is effective, but that's the only way I can possibly imagine that he's allowing this to happen, because he's not coming out afterwards and saying, we didn't do the plan.
Yeah, he's always saying, yeah, the plan was good. The tactical, the way the team played tactically is what I wanted. He said that, fairly recently after one of the other really poor performances, which have all kind of melded into one in my mind.
So I think he thinks he's found some kind of mad loophole where, it's fine if the opposition have loads of shots because they're not going to be high quality shots. But results do not bear that out at all.
It's like, let the two best attacking fullbacks in the Premier League throw in lots of crosses. We'll just deal with the crosses.
Yeah.
You might deal with most of them, but eventually you're going to get done. It's insane, really.
And also, this isn't the two best attacking fullbacks in the Premier League. This is Southampton.
Oh, yeah.
And we're at home.
And we're at home, and we actually have, one of the best strikers in the Premier League, a very able partner for him as well in Lacazette, and, a £72 million summer signing, who apparently is the kind of player that Emery wanted to make his team more attacking. It just beggars belief to me that, if he is aware that his defence is not great, and he must be because everyone else in the fucking world is, like, there isn't this idea of, well, you know what, let's just have a go from an attacking point of view. Let's focus on that strength that we have within the squad and see how that goes. He just will not allow the team to go out and express itself or to take those kind of risks. Instead, he prefers to sort of take these, what he considers acceptable risks, by allowing the opposition to have loads of shots from poor positions. Eventually,
Absolutely.
you're just getting way down. I don't get it.
And do you know who's got comfortably the best defence in the Premier League, defensive record, is Leicester City. And they've conceded 8 goals this season, for context, to Arsenal's 19, which is 3 fewer than Liverpool. And nobody thinks of Brendan Rodgers as, a guy who is a defensive coach.
Yeah.
He's someone who understands that by controlling possession, you protect your back line. And Emery just does not subscribe to that at all. He's the antithesis. He feels like they can have the possession. We'll just guard our territory. But what we are seeing borne out is that one way works better than the other. Certainly for this group of players. I mean, it's just a coach who seems really ill-suited to his squad and his club. And I've seen this example cited elsewhere, but the example of Roy Hodgson at Liverpool, I think, is really apt, because Roy Hodgson is a very able manager. I think he does a really good job at Crystal Palace. But and he did it at Fulham, and he's done it at other places, international teams, etc. When you put him in at Liverpool, culturally, there was something about the way he saw football that just didn't sit right. And he must have felt it. The supporters absolutely felt it and made it pretty clear. And ultimately, it just didn't last. And I think when you look at Emery at Arsenal, I think it is the same. I think it's a square peg in a round hole. It is the wrong person and personality for this club.
I could not agree with that anymore. Could not agree with him more. He just, is entirely the wrong man for what our idea of what Arsenal Football Club should be, in terms of A, where it is, B, how it plays, C, what it's producing on the pitch, and D, the ambition that we supposedly have to get back into the top four and to challenge for the biggest trophies, which of course is just some bullshit that they say that they want. They're not acting like that's what they want, because they're allowing this to continue. But we'll have some discussion on Emery and those above him now in a minute. I want to ask you something, and it's not an easy question to answer, so I'll give you my take on it first. I felt almost disappointed when Lacazette scored, and that's a terrible way to feel about a football club that you have supported your entire life, because a last-minute equaliser, you should be happy that you've got something from the game, even if it's a poor performance. Every point is vital, and I understand there's like a sort of a dichotomy here between wanting what's best for the football club, and I think we could see from last season that every single point that you get is really important in the final table. But I looked at that goal and I was like, well, I don't know if that's great for us, because obviously I thought a win or a defeat would perhaps force those above Emery into some action. It's this weird thing. I don't want Arsenal to lose. I'd never want Arsenal to lose. But at the same time, I couldn't help how I felt. And then I felt really quite angry and upset that I felt like that, because I feel like I've been pushed into that position because of what's going on right now. It's a weird one. I don't know what you felt, and I looked at Lacazette after he scored, and it was almost a bit like, oh, fuck.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, there was a chance that fell to Mesut Ozil in the penalty box. And this is proper, the moon landing didn't happen stuff, where he sort of scooped it over the bar. And there was something in him. I just thought, I don't know how disappointed he is about that. And when Lacazette scored, there was a really weird reaction. I was behind that goal.
Yeah.
And it was so muted. And granted, it's because, it's Southampton and it's still only a draw and it's still not a good enough result. But it was almost like there weren't really celebrations. I've never seen a reaction to a goal quite like it.
No.
When you're getting hammered and you score, there are at least sort of ironic cheers, or something but there was just sort of a collective shrug. Even from the players, I couldn't believe it. Like Lacazette, he put the ball in the net and he looked at the ground. And I think someone eventually got the ball out the goal, but it took a bit of time. And in the moment, I sort of was like, is this something to do with VAR? Because we'd had such a long VAR delay earlier in the game. I do think that has a bit of an impact. And I think you saw that in that moment. I think of well, do goals count now? Do we have to check this? What's going on? But I do think, of course, the managerial situation and people sort of almost wanting that to come to a head is a factor in that.
Yeah.
And, the come to a head is an interesting phrase, isn't it? The reason, let's say you've got a boil, if you'll forgive the unpleasant image, you want it to come to a head so that you can lance it and get it better.
Yeah.
It's natural to want the bad things to reach a point at which they can be fixed or will be fixed. And I think there was definitely a lot of that in the ground. I mean, we can talk about this more, but, I witnessed firsthand a lot of people chanting about the manager, we want Emery out or sacked in the morning.
Yeah.
That was happening. And it was interesting. There was a bit of a dissent. There were people in the ground who felt that wasn't appropriate, and they certainly made those feelings known. And there was back and forth about that, and there was confrontation about that. And that is also a shame that we, after the whole Wenger in out hokey cokey, we're already back into a situation where Arsenal fans, are kind of, as a consequence of events, sort of inwardly aggressive. That's a shame too.
Yeah. It was just a weird sensation, a very unpleasant sensation as well. To be that either disappointed or to feel so much nothing about a goal and thinking maybe, okay, that's a goal and we've got a point, but maybe this means we just get more of this next week when we go to Norwich. And that was just my fear.
Yeah, I mean, 4 games, Southampton, Norwich, what are the other 2 sort of winnable games? Brighton and West Ham, is it?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I really felt, people said to me before the game, what do you think Emery needs from this? And I almost felt like he needed 12 points, to be honest, to withstand that period, and to earn himself some credit. And to have fallen at the first hurdle is damning. And I think as well, it's kind of striking that I think some of our worst performances have come off the back of international breaks at a time when we don't have that many international players. So
yeah,
I think Watford might have been, or was that before an international break? I don't know. Basically, every time we come back off an international break, you think, well, they've had 2 weeks to work on the game plan. And then you see the game plan and you're like, oh, God, I wish they hadn't had 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, the interlull was better.
Yeah.
So let me see. Yeah, Watford was straight after an interlull.
Yeah.
Sheffield United was straight after an interlull. And Saturday was after an interlull.
The more lead time Emery has, the worse he is. And I think that, that's a bad sign too.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of bad signs. On that goal, because I think a lot of people will have felt the same as you, certainly, or certainly felt that conflict, and you could sense it in the ground. The only thing I will say, and I know people think Unai Emery should be gone yesterday. I know that's what everyone thinks. Surely, if you're the board, that one goal can't possibly be the basis for your decision. Can it?
No, it can't. But I mean, I think it maybe allows them to let it chug on a little bit longer, because a defeat is something extra. This way you could say, well, we haven't lost a game at home this season, which is true. But of course, we've only won 4 of 13 Premier League games. And I think, at this point we need to distinguish between, what we call the board and the people who are actually making decisions now. Because you saw, you will have read Amy Lawrence's piece in The Athletic where the chairman, Sir Chips Keswick, has considered resigning because the people who are on the board, Sir Chips and Lord Harris and Ken Fryer, all these guys who are real, whether you like them or otherwise, are Arsenal through and through. They've grown up Arsenal fans and they've represented the club, but the board, the old traditional board as we know it, as the people who make decisions and what have you, are now completely redundant. They don't have any influence. They might have the ability to talk, they might have the ability to make their opinions known, but ultimately no power to do anything. So even if they wanted to sack Emery yesterday, they couldn't do it.
No.
So the people who are allowing this to continue are the owners, KSE, and I think Stan Kroenke, but mostly Josh Kroenke, it was made clear, wasn't it, during the summer that he is the guy at KSE who is in charge at Arsenal, right?
Yeah, I believe he was there on Saturday.
Right.
He's been at quite a few home games this season.
Right.
But yeah. So yes, I think certainly KSE, and then of course the executive team, and I think probably principally Raul Sanllehi.
Yes. I mean, I know we include Vinay and we include Edu and we include sometimes Husfami, the contract guy. But yeah, head of football is Raul Sanllehi. It was Raul Sanllehi who blocked the appointment of David O'Leary to, the board or the executive committee, football executive committee, as we have to call them, to distinguish them from what is the old board. So it's Sanllehi, really, because I'm just trying to figure out, what the remit of Edu's job is. And I know that when they announced it, they did say that. So just bear with me 1 second while I bring this up.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and one I've been asked quite a lot recently. What is the division of responsibility between Raul Sanllehi and Edu? I think my understanding is that Edu's, I know he's technical director, but it is more on the technical side. So things like scouting, coaching, certainly at academy level, they all fall under his remit. There's been some changes there already that we know about, with Steve Martin, etc.
Okay, I have it here. In his role as technical director, Edu will coordinate the work of our first team coaching group, the academy, and player scouting and recruitment in order to oversee the constant building up and efficient strengthening of our squad. So, coordinate the work of our first team coaching group is an interesting...
Yeah, coordinate feels like the pertinent word there. It's not quite decide, is it? It's, he comes from an administrative role with Brazil, and I think this is a role that's principally about organisation and structure, and he is restructuring the scouting. He is restructuring some of the coaching on the academy side with Per. I'm not sure that his powers do extend to hiring and firing a head coach. I'm not 100% on that, but it doesn't feel that way.
No, it doesn't to me either. This is what Sanllehi said about him. He said he will be working closely with Unai Emery and the first team coaches and will play a relevant role leading our football vision and ensuring we have and follow a solid philosophy through all our football activities. So it is a bit distant from that. So whoever the first team coach is, Edu would be working with them. I think that's what we can understand from that.
It's really interesting because I've been sort of doing a bit of research this week trying to find out about Raul Sanllehi and managers that he sacked or appointed in his time at Barcelona. And what you hear back is a similar thing of, it was quite murky. There were sort of lots of people with similar job titles, and it's not really clear who did what. And I think with Raul and Edu, there is a little bit of that there, where it's sort of, from the outside, it's quite difficult to delineate. But the buck has to stop, surely, with the man whose title is head of football. Exactly.
And somebody who does have the ear of the owner, and, head of football means that he makes the decisions. I don't know what it is if they're sitting around after the games and they're, I presume they're discussing what's going on at Arsenal. I presume they're looking at our season. I presume they're looking at our position in the league table. What are they seeing that is making them think that Emery is worth persisting with? Why are they tarnishing their own reputations, which they are, the longer they let this go on? They are driving fans into a state of apathy, where Arsenal goals disappoint you. What the fuck is that? I can't get my head around feeling like that. I really can't. But, there's also a season to save here. And it's a tall order, I realise. But the longer they let it go on, the more and more difficult it is going to become.
Yeah, it's not insurmountable. We've had a third of our Premier League fixtures, pretty much. Just over a third. A dramatic turnaround could turn this round. It's not going to happen under Unai Emery, I don't think. There's no real evidence of that. I mean, if anything, I think we're getting worse. So what do they see? I have to say, if they're using as evidence what they see on the football pitch, they can't really see anything there. The results aren't good, and it's not as if the underlying metrics somehow redeem the performances. If anything, they confirm our fears.
Of course.
Or suggest we should be worse off than we actually are. So their decision to not sack Emery, I think, cannot be based on the team's performances. Increasingly, I'm of that mind, because there's just no argument, is there? There's no possible...
No, there's nothing that we're seeing on the pitch. There's nothing that he's producing. There's nothing that he's saying. You know, there are stories over the weekend about losing the dressing room, and you always take those with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But when they start coming out about a manager, and look, you know, I've heard some things secondhand, so I can't say 100% if they're true, but certainly what came out over the weekend about some of the dressing room feeling towards the manager, it tallies with what I've heard. It was also put to me that maybe as a club, we don't want to be seen to be the kind of club that sacks managers willy-nilly. And that
I've heard that.
Yeah. Which is, of course, ridiculous. You know, it is a ridiculous thing. We're on that managerial merry-go-round, and we have to deal with the fact that we are not going to have another Arsene Wenger. We're not going to have a 20-year guy in charge. And
well, yeah, I mean, we've sacked is, you know, a strong word, but we've essentially sacked one manager in 24 years. I mean, I don't think another one makes us trigger happy.
No, it doesn't.
You know, it's all about what follows that. I don't think it could be based on performances on the pitch, which then begs the question, of course, well, what is it based on?
This is the financial suggestion, isn't there, that it costs too much to pay him off? But, you know, look, when you're putting at risk tens of millions of pounds in Champions League football, it's small potatoes to pay off
even the Europa League money. Like, you know, that if we miss out on the Europa League, that costs us, you know, tens of millions of pounds. So it's a change you would make financially. It's a gamble you would take, especially if you're in a position where you spent the money we did in the summer and showed a willingness to speculate in order to achieve some success. Then it doesn't make any sense to not follow that through at coaching level. I can only think that there is, for some reason, something that affects the timing of this, and it is to do with a potential appointment. And I'm not saying there that, they know that in January they can get Joe Bloggs, and Joe Bloggs is who they want. I wonder if there is just a sense of, well, what are we going to do? And maybe they don't want to sack a manager until they have the next person absolutely lined up.
Yeah.
Because, look at Spurs' conduct in the international break. They sacked Pochettino and had Mourinho appointed the next morning. I mean, I think we can all surmise, and I think I've read that, talks were going on for 2 or 3 weeks before that. So, that's the only possible thing that could be holding them back. And even then, I think you're entitled to say, well, why don't they know?
Yeah. I think you are entitled to say that, and you're entitled to wonder that, and you're entitled to have some serious concerns that the people running the football side of this football club perhaps aren't quite as smart as we thought they were. They're not quite as competent as we thought they were. When they talk about having this vision for what Arsenal should be and what Arsenal needs to be in the future, it's all well and good saying, yes, we want this club to be back in the Champions League and to be competing for the biggest trophies, etc., etc. But any cunt could fucking say that. That's the easy part. The difficult part is making that happen and acting in a way which makes that a possibility or a likelihood. But what we're doing is nothing.
Do you think if...
Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, do you think if Raul turns around to Josh and says, I think we should change the manager, do you think... I suppose what I'm trying to work out is, where do we apportion this? Where does this lie? Has Raul really got the dominion?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course he does. As head of football, he's got to be the one. I mean, Josh Kroenke, even if he is more involved and even if he is attending more games and everything else. He doesn't have the requisite knowledge of football or managerial candidates or anything like that to take control of that side of things. That job has been delegated to Sanyehi and to a lesser extent the other people on this football executive committee. So I think if Sanyehi said to him, we need to change the manager, I don't think Josh Kroenke would say no. I don't think he would. I don't think he could really, because what's his argument for keeping him? What's his argument for saying, okay, no, we should stick with Emery because he can turn it around?
Yeah, I agree with you. When I look at Arsene Wenger's last few years and I think about Stan Kroenke extending Arsene Wenger's contract after the 2017 final. There was talk then that on the board there wasn't necessarily a united view as to whether that was the right decision.
Well, at least that came after success and winning a trophy.
Absolutely, I'm not questioning that. But then also when Arsene went at the end of last season, Josh's hand in that was certainly played in the media as an influencing factor. I suppose what I'm getting to with this is that I just feel like this is inextricably linked to the ownership of the club, basically. As much as I do question Raul Sanyehi's decisions over the coaching staff, over the head coach, Unai Emery, I kind of feel like almost feel like he's a red herring. That the ownership thing is more prominent.
Well, I think at this point, for me anyway, Emery is not the major problem. I mean, if we allow him to continue doing what he's doing, then it's on the club. I think Emery has shown us who he is and what he does, and it's not good enough. We can see that, and we've seen it week in, week out, and every week it's getting worse, and the players look more disconnected from it, the fans feel more disconnected from it, the performances, the stats, none of it is good enough. So when you have that mountain of evidence and you allow the man to continue, I'm not going to get angry at him anymore. I mean, he frustrates me. I don't like the way he sets up his teams. I don't like the football that he plays. I don't like pretty much anything about what he does at Arsenal. His personality, his character. He just doesn't fit. He's not the right guy for Arsenal Football Club. He doesn't have what it takes to be the Arsenal manager. But, he's not going to walk away. And you can criticize him for that if you want. But, no manager really steps down, unless they're, they all think, if I just get another result, if I just get a second result, I can turn this around. And I'm sure it comes from a place of wanting to do his best for the football club and wanting to make it better. Like he doesn't want to see Arsenal where they are. I'm sure of that. He's just not good enough to make it any better. So you can't get mad at him. I don't think you can get mad at him when the bigger problem is the people above him who can see all the same stuff that we're seeing from a much more focused point of view, because they're in it.
Yeah.
They're in it. They've got access to everything. They know, we can talk about players being unhappy and maybe losing the dressing room. They will know that players are unhappy, that there's some discord within the squad. Players aren't shy about telling football clubs when they're not happy. They've got Aubameyang who won't sign a new contract, because why the fuck would you sign a new contract with all this going on? They've got all of this extra information from inside the club that we don't have. Staff at the football club are not happy. They would be far more aware of that than you or I would, but we know that as well, right?
Yeah.
So the problem is
performances. Yeah. Sorry, just to say, likewise in performances. I mean, we look at things like underlying metrics and see problems. I mean, Arsenal own a stats company. They are aware of that stuff too. We're not smarter than their analytics guys, that's for sure.
Okay, so I mean, they're the problem. more than Emery at this point. Allowing it to continue without just addressing this massive problem that we have, which is that a season is almost beyond us, and it's the end of November.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hold out really any realistic hope of making the top four at this point.
No. I mean, we are
even with a change and an uplift. Like it feels like a big gap at this stage.
We are 19 points off the top of the table after 13 games of a new season, and I don't, and you don't, and nobody listening to this expected Arsenal to be challenging for the title. That's completely unrealistic. But to be 19 points off the leaders, who I know have had a fantastic run and everything else, but, we're also, whatever we are, 11 points off second place. And second place is Leicester City. We are closer, or just as close, I think, to the relegation zone as we are to the top four. Like, what the fuck are they waiting for? Because every week they are costing us points by not doing something about it. Because we joked about it, didn't we? Or we said it on the last podcast or the one before. It's like, well, if they let him continue, they're putting points at risk. And so it proved. And if they let him continue into next Sunday's game against Norwich, we haven't won away since the opening day of the season. They're basically saying we're willing to risk those points for whatever fucking weird stance they're taking, or that they have in their mind about not changing a manager, which is one of the things a football club should be willing and prepared to do when it gets as bad as this, and certainly well before now, in my opinion. So it's Raul Sanllehi that's to blame for those points lost on Saturday for me. The head of football, the football executive committee, drag as many of them into it as you want. Josh Kroenke, they're the ones who are presiding over this fucking mess. So while I'm not a fan of Emery, I just don't see this being on him anymore, because it's them. They're the ones that can A, put a stop to it, and B, it's their job to make it better.
Yeah, as you said yourself, I don't think anyone doubts that Emery is trying to get results. He's probably trying harder than he's ever tried. He knows desperately that he needs them. He needs to try and turn this round for his reputation as much as anything else. So, you can dislike what he does, but I don't think, it's sort of not his fault that his limitations are his limitations, and there are people with the power to change things. And I guess when Arsene Wenger was at the club, he was kind of this unsackable figure, and it was sort of easy to an extent to kind of absolve some of those executives and think, well, that's not really a decision that's in their power to make. Emery hasn't really done anything to earn that status.
No, but you're right. Isn't that the whole point of putting in place these modern structures at a football club where, you've got your executive committee and you've got people who are in charge of transfers and you've got a technical director who's looking after the club's playing philosophy and recruitment and, all that kind of stuff. And then you have a head coach. And the reason you put those structures in place is because it's easier to make changes when you need to make changes. So it's difficult to sack a legacy manager like Wenger, who had control over so many areas of the football club. But it's not difficult to sack a head coach, because all you're doing is just taking out this little slice and replacing it with another little slice. Yep. It's like changing an ink cartridge in your printer. That's what it's like. Yeah,
absolutely. It should be like that. And I look back at the summer and I think, there was a lot of unhappiness, and ultimately Raul and co kind of came up trumps to a degree. Certainly they produced a set of signings that most fans were happy with, whether or not that's sort of borne out or not. The key differential, I think, between the summer and now is that in the summer, the one thing you have that you don't have now is time. There is months without a game. And if you haven't got it right at the start of the summer, you've still got 2 months at that point to change it and fix it. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter if you get a player in for the start of pre-season or in for the first game. It doesn't have a huge effect. time now is actively costing us points. So we cannot afford to move as slowly as we have moved as a club. We need to be more decisive. And yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I keep referencing Arsene Wenger, and apologies for that, but he was kind of ridiculed for his indecision. But currently indecision or a lack of decisiveness is what's hurting us in the post-Wenger era.
Yeah, big time. There were a number of people who wondered if, given the fact that Emery was appointed during the recording of our podcast, the live one, you might remember when we were all thinking about Mikel Arteta, and then he was announced, Josh Craig, for example. I sincerely hope Emery is sacked during this podcast, just as he was hired during a previous one of yours. But so far, that doesn't appear to be the case. I haven't had any text messages, or my phone is not buzzing about that.
No. Shall we call it part one? And maybe by the time we come back for part two, he'll have gone.
That's what happened the last time. Remember?
Yeah, exactly.
We just finished
the
part
interval
one.
was crucial.
We were having a nice drink, so let's go and get a cool, refreshing beverage or a cup of coffee or whatever it is. We'll come back in part two, and maybe the world will be a brighter place.
Hopefully so.
Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part two of the show where we answer questions that you send to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog, on the Arseblog Facebook page, facebook.com/the Arseblog, and also on the Arseblog Patreon Discord server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member. On Patreon, you can be if you want to be. Patreon.com/Arseblog. A couple of little things to get through, James, just before we get into the questions. First is the Santi Cazorla boot competition that we ran last week. Santi Cazorla's signed boot here. It's an Evo Speed Puma left boot, black and grey with a white bit and a green stripy bit and, some stuff on it. Santi has signed it. The question was, who did he score his first goal against? It was, of course, Liverpool in a 2-0 win at Anfield. Lucas Podolski also scored, and I think that was the day that Diaby played that game that everyone went,
yeah.
Why couldn't he do this all the time? Why I wish he could do this all the time.
We still see highlights of his performance in that game on Twitter and stuff. And because Cazorla was brilliant that day. I think he might have set up Podolski's goal as well as scoring himself. So with, I believe, his left foot.
Well, it doesn't matter for Santi which foot it is. The winner, I've just gone through all the emails here and I've picked one at random. The winner is Joey Halliday. So well done to you, Joey. I will be in touch. I'll get your details and I will get that boot signed out or sent out. And thank you to everybody for sending in your entries. It's what is it? It's competition and you didn't win. I'm sorry. I got a little bit tongue-tied there because I was thinking of the next thing that I was going to ask you, and then I had a terrible vision in my mind. Okay. Because you were going to keep us up to date with what was going on with Ian Wright in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and I just remembered that I sent you a text last night saying, did Wrighty just drink a load of pig cocks?
Yes, he did. I mean, in what can only be interpreted as a metaphor for Arsenal's current form, the man was forced to drink a pint of blended pigs' penises.
That's not right. It's not right.
It's Ian wrong. Yeah,
no, but whatever about okay, you've got to crawl through the bush and you've got to, maybe slither through a cave of maggots or worms or something. Taking a load of pig mickeys and sticking them in a NutriBullet and making them drink.
That is the law of the jungle, Andrew. As we all know, when you live in the jungle, you must drink the pig penis smoothies. That is how the jungle works. That's what Tarzan himself lived on.
I saw a picture of it. I didn't, obviously watch it, but I saw a picture of him where he seems to have some of this horrendous concoction on his face, and he's got the 1,000-yard stare of a Vietnam vet.
Yeah.
Is he ever going to be the same again when he comes back?
I don't know. He had to do some other pretty grim stuff yesterday. I mean, the tragedy of it all was that the reason he was drinking the pig's penises was part of a competition to win a roast dinner for him and his camp.
Right.
And he did his part and won a roast dinner for someone else, but he was one of just 3 of the 12 who won't get a roast dinner. And I mean, the devastation was etched all over his face.
Oh my God.
I think he's struggling with the lack of food, to be honest with you.
Well,
who wouldn't?
Whoever let him down there, that's disgraceful. I hope you feel terrible about yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he would prefer to be doing what he's doing or watching Arsenal, to be honest. I think it's sort of a toss-up, to be honest. Yeah. But he's acquitting himself very well. I fear that the public will keep voting him to do stuff, horrible stuff, like you say, crawl through tunnels with worms in, because he's very entertaining when he does it. Hopefully he has a bit of an easier time over the next week or so.
All right. The other thing I just wanted to mention was the full rendition of the Lewis Capaldi song, which has gone down a storm. And when you sent it to me, I listened to it, and the first thing I was going to reply to you was like, your wife is away again, is she? But you just, when I was talking to you, you just said, yeah, Camille was pretty confused. That was just so funny.
She was in the bath, I think, at the time.
Just trying to imagine.
Yeah. Afterwards, she was like, what were you doing? I was like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
You'll find out soon enough.
But it was a one-take wonder. I mean, you can't be doing multiple recordings. Like, I think I could do that a bit better, actually. I don't think my neighbours would permit that. But seek it out. I mean, it's a sorrowful, mournful song. So it's quite fitting, really, for what's going on.
Well, you nailed it. One-take wonder. Congratulations. It was great. You can find it on the Arseblog YouTube channel if you like. So, look, let's get into a couple of the questions. And this one comes from the Discord. It's from Isaac, who says, what would be the potential negative consequences of failing to achieve Champions League football for next season? It seems obvious that we'd hire a new manager and some of our best players would want to leave, but would there be any other likely unpleasant outcomes that we're not aware of yet?
I mean, they're sort of unpleasant enough. The losing all our best players one's not great, is it?
Yeah, no.
I think it would have serious repercussions for certainly Aubameyang and Lacazette and their future, potentially the future of someone like Hector Bellerin. Basically, any of our players that might be in demand elsewhere, I think would have to consider a move or consider their futures. Financially, I think it would obviously impede us in terms of our expenditure in the summer transfer window. I just think as well there's a bigger thing, which is kind of the status of the club. And, something we've not talked about on this show is what's happening on the other side of North London. And I think there's a reason we're not talking about it. It's because it's so hideously unpleasant. But, unveiled a new stadium. They've unveiled a new manager who, whatever you may think of him, is a big name. And they have won away on the road at West Ham. And, potentially you're looking at an upturn there. And I just think in terms of sort of where we're headed in club and the perception of Arsenal from the outside, another year out of the Champions League, it would be very damaging indeed. But that's the likelihood at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, if you look at the Premier League table, they're still below us, I think.
They are. As are United.
United. But if you were to say, like, which club is more likely to have a good go at making the top 4 from this position, at this moment in time, it's them. And that is really unpleasant. It was quite interesting. I was thinking on whatever day it was, maybe Sunday or some day before the weekend anyway, when they appointed Mourinho, it just felt to me like the kind of move to make them more attractive to a potential buyer. And that's a little fear that I have, that maybe by getting this box office manager in, like he's a box office cunt as well, and I didn't want him at Arsenal, but there's no doubting his reputation and everything else. He does bring that to them, and it just occurred to me that maybe this is a move that's coming, which might see Tottenham be sold to somebody with the kind of deep pockets that we do not want to see Tottenham sold to.
That would be hugely worrying. Yeah, that would be terrible for Arsenal. I mean, and it could happen. I mean, there is a lot of talk that Spurs are sort of essentially being fattened up for a sale. So yeah, that is a frightening prospect. I just think the size of the club and the grandeur of the club is being sort of gradually diminished by our presence in the Europa League, or potentially not even in the Europa League. I think we genuinely have to think about that as a prospect this season now.
Yeah. I think some of the other real world consequences of not being in the Champions League or even having no European football will be affected, throughout the club. There's a lot of people that work for Arsenal. Yeah. People, Arsenal is a massive organisation now. There are hundreds and hundreds of people working there. And we know that the Cronkies have already put in place cost-cutting measures, behind the scenes. It's one thing to splash out £72 million on Pepe, great. But, behind the scenes, there are other issues. And I think if Arsenal continue on this slide, continue on this trajectory without halting it, without, getting ourselves back into Europe's top competition, there will be people who lose their jobs. Mm-hmm. Ordinary people, like, players, who gives a fuck, really? Players will always be all right because they're wealthy enough to deal with it. They'll be fine. I'm not saying fuck the players by any means. It's important we hold on to our best players and bring in better ones. But, I think if it goes wrong for a footballer, he just goes to a different club and earns a massive amount of money there as well until such time as he retires. So it's different for people who work in, administration or back offices or support staff or all of those things. They could be at risk as well. So there are real life consequences for that. But I do agree with you that the prestige or the perception of Arsenal as a big club, the shine is well and truly off now. Mm-hmm. And the longer it goes on and the longer it takes to address it, the more we establish ourselves as a kind of also ran. Because even when Liverpool were going through their struggles, and it's not long ago Liverpool were struggling, but they always had their sort of European history to sort of bolster them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they won the Champions League in that period.
Yeah, we don't have that. We're a club that last won the title. It's going to 16
coming up 50. It's going to be 16 years this year. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We spend a lot of time looking at the modern Liverpool as something to emulate, but I think that, there is also a lot of fear there that we are kind of the 90s Liverpool. You know what I mean? That we are the sort of Roy Evans, Spice Boys Liverpool. Cup finals and sort of vaguely mid-table finishes.
At least they had lovely white suits.
They did have those nice white suits, to be fair. The next manager must wear a white suit on the touchline. That's my insistence. This is from Sandeep Gottimukala on Twitter. And Sandeep says, oh, actually, do you know what, Sandeep? I've said that and then I've realised we've sort of covered your question. I will read it now because I've come this far. Everyone wants Emery out, but no one questions whether we have the resources... brackets money to make such a change. Why, and do you think we have the money? And if not, do the board deserve some pity?
No, they don't deserve any pity. Fuck them.
Okay. Do we have the money?
Of course.
Yeah, I think we do as well.
Of course. It's of course we do. Of course.
If we don't have it, we could certainly get access to it.
Yeah. It's not that much.
No.
I don't
if a player broke a leg and we needed to replace them in January, we could do it. So we could do this. That's my opinion.
Yeah, essentially, what does it cost to sack Emery? A low level footballer from the Swiss league, like El Neni. It would cost an El Neni to sack Unai Emery.
And an arm and an El Neni.
Yeah.
I think we can afford it too. Well, in which case, let's do this question, which I actually meant to do, which from Andy Brooke. Andy says, have we overestimated the squad? Lots of us thought we had a great summer and barring some obvious needs, thought we had a top 4 squad. Is there now a realisation that this squad is a mid-table one, aside from Emery being awful?
I still think this is a group of players that is capable of far better than we're seeing. I think there are issues. Certainly there are issues. There's a big problem at centre half, and there has been for a long time, and you might question whether the money we spent on someone like Pepe in the summer might have been better spent on a central defender if you could find that player. But even aside from the gaps in the squad, I just think it's been so badly managed that they're not getting anything like what they're capable of in terms of performances, and we can talk about the tactics, we can talk about the systems, the formations, the way that players are deployed, but there are other issues as well. How can Torreira play his best football when he's not played in his best position, and he's unhappy about that? The Xhaka situation is a shambles as well. We've had the Ozil situation. I think certainly any squad you look at over the years at Arsenal, you could say it can be improved. But I don't know that if this was the absolute best that anyone could get out of the squad, we'd be able to say, yes, this is a mid-table squad. But I don't believe that it's impossible for somebody else to come in and make it better with the players that we have right now.
No, I definitely think that's correct. That they are not playing at the maximum of their potential. I think that there is a slight tendency at the moment to be like, well, because the manager's bad, there can sort of be no real examination of the squad. And I think it's always a little bit from column A and column B. I think this squad has got more problems maybe than we are prepared to admit. I think there are areas in which it's excellent, like in terms of striking talent, fantastic. We've got Aubameyang and Lacazette, brilliant. I think the fullbacks are strong, Tierney and Bellerin. I didn't even mention Pepe in the attacking third, Mesut Ozil to consider, I suppose. But we've got a good goalkeeper, but I do think when you look at the actual spine of the team, the centre halves and the central midfield, I think it is way off. I think it is not good. And, I'm not absolving Emery of blame for that, but I do think that it's worth talking about. The centre of our defence is terrible. And I actually think our central midfield is terrible, even if there are players within that collection that we think are good. Arsene Wenger kept saying he had his most talented squad, but it didn't make for his best team. And I think even though there are talented players, there are just sort of chronic issues with balance. So I think for us to be a Champions League team, both those areas really, really, really would have to be addressed. But if the ownership don't want to pull the trigger on sacking a manager at that expense, I don't necessarily see them pushing the boat out to get the players we need in those areas of the park. Yeah.
Well, here's a question that we get all the time. It's, if and when they finally decide to make a change, maybe in, 3 or 4 weeks' time when we've got 1 point from the last 9, maybe then they might do it. There are a lot of questions about who it should be. So Adem Topku, who's at @ad_ski, says, do you think we have a realistic chance of tempting Arteta? The other name that was doing the rounds this weekend was Allegri. Max Traharn, who's at Max Traharn 2, says, with rumours swirling about Allegri as a replacement for Emery, do you think it would be a good appointment? Personally, I get the impression that Allegri would be Unai 2.0, and I'd rather just give Freddie a go to the end of the season. I know it's really difficult to to nail your colours to any one mast on this, but what do you think of some of the names that are doing the rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is sort of part of the problem, is that none of the names sort of light a fire in me particularly. I've got sort of concerns over all of them for different reasons. If I take my rational hat off and just talk about it emotionally as purely a fan, I feel like there's such a strong disconnect between the club and the supporters and the team and the supporters that I really do just want someone to come in who can rebuild that connection and sort of, communicate well and sort of demonstrate a way forward so that people feel part of the journey, part of the process. I remember, I was reflecting on it this weekend. I remember quite early in Jurgen Klopp's reign, he drew a match at home at Anfield. And after the match, he went out on the pitch and was sort of doing his thing with
Didn't
the fans.
he get all the players to line up and sort of do a kind of like...
possibly, yeah.
We've, one of those where they all link arms and there's...
Something like that. And everyone was like... Everyone royally took the piss, right? Because they were like, they drew and they're celebrating it. And I probably joined in at the time. But this weekend, when I was at the Emirates Stadium, I was reflecting on that and feeling very differently about it, I suppose. And feeling that obviously what you're seeing there is people who feel like they're on side and feel like they're part of something and who recognise that you can't win every game. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, the journey or the bigger picture isn't worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I feel very envious about that. That feels a million miles away at Arsenal at the moment. Can you imagine if, we got the last minute equaliser against Southampton and then Emery's out on the pitch and there's this sense of, us against the world, collective spirit. I mean, that isn't really going to happen. But that's what I would love to see. And as someone who has a season ticket and goes to every game, wow, I'd love to be part of that and feel... I'm jealous of that. And so when I think about a new manager, I do think about a kind of totemic leader who I think people would really get behind. And it's difficult for me to put a name even to it, but that's the profile. And Allegri's CV, rationally and coldly, is fantastic. And I know, that will garner him a lot of support, but it's difficult for me to sort of explain it, but I just don't feel that connection, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I get it. I did ask James Horncastle, who covers Italian football, about Allegri and his English, because I think one of the problems that we have with Emery is his English or his communication. It is a problem. It is a factor. It's not, the major overriding factor, but that's part of why I think there's a confusion among the players about what they're being asked to do. B, in the media, where he can't really explain himself as fully as he might like, and C, we find it very difficult to connect with him because of that. Like, we don't know what it is exactly he's trying to say, and when we look at what it is, we're sort of going, well, this is garbage. Yeah. This is incomprehensible garbage. What are we supposed to take from this? So James said that with regards to Allegri, he probably understands some English but isn't a confident speaker. So I wonder if that would be a factor when the football executive committee come to making the decision. Do they need somebody who the fans can immediately connect with, or that the coach can the coach can come in and explain what it is he's going to do and explain his ideas and explain all of that very clearly in a way that people can get behind. Now, it'll be up to him to prove that with what he does, with the team on the pitch and everything else. But I do feel like that would be an impediment to the appointment of Allegri for me. I think that will be something that they would think of, not to mention his salary and everything else.
What about alternative names then? Is there anyone who you would think of above any other? I mean, sorry to cut across, having just asked you a question.
Sure.
But I've actually not listened to it yet, but I know that on Friday's Arsecast, Philippe Auclair ventured the name of Patrick Vieira, didn't he? Yeah. And I know that the immediate comeback to that is that that's a kind of, that Vieira's not having the best time of it in Liga at the moment. And, I think people...
Well, Roy Hodgson did badly at Liverpool, but well everywhere else.
Well, that's it. That is kind of it. And I know that, certain managers are just suited to certain jobs. In terms of being like a figurehead.
A personality, and
also someone who is a good friend of Edu. They have maintained a relationship post their playing careers. I do feel like his name would be in the mix, actually, even though he doesn't necessarily have the CV. I think speaking from that fan emotional perspective, I would definitely have his name on a list of candidates.
Yeah, we had a question from Tom Stratton, who's at Tom Stratton, who says, what should the profile of the next manager be? My feeling is focusing on names rather than qualities delivered Emery over a less heralded candidate. What are the qualities we should be prioritising this time to avoid making the same mistake? So, obviously, I think you need somebody, or Arsenal right now need somebody with a clear footballing philosophy, an idea of how they want the team to play, and the ability to instruct and coach a team to go out and do exactly that. I think we've gone too far the other way from Wenger's we will play our own way and that's the only way we will play, to Emery's we will play in a way which will be dictated to by the opposition, regardless of how menial or meagre they might be. We will first and foremost look at what they could do to us and then try and play around that. So I think we've gone too far.
Yeah, so, I agree. And also, I kind of think maybe that was sort of a necessary process, that in some ways all managerial appointments are kind of responses to the problems of the last one. And that, Wenger maybe was too obsessed with playing our own game, and then so we reacted to that and appointed someone who was the antithesis, and now we've realised that was too far. Maybe we meet somewhere in the middle, and that's actually the correct space to operate in. It's just taken us a process to get there. Funnily enough, process being one of the words that Unai Emery uses most frequently. But I do think that one interesting question is, I think there's a perception that Unai Emery, I've heard a lot of people say, he's used to managing smaller clubs, or, clubs that aren't as big as Arsenal. I don't think that's necessarily correct, in that I think that there are big clubs where he might do a good job, where this sort of footballing expectations and identity is different. I felt for much of last season, Unai Emery and Maurizio Sarri had the wrong jobs. They were at the wrong clubs, and if they'd swapped, they might have been better received by their fans. But it does raise an interesting question of sort of, would Arsenal take a gamble on a manager from a smaller club now? Is there a risk of, would people feel like, we're putting someone with a small club mentality, even if there's someone who's quite promising but they've not had a chance yet at the top level? I mean, there were a lot of questions I saw on Twitter and in the Discord today about someone like Eddie Howe, for example, who has been at Bournemouth for God knows how long, and his achievements there are, I think, objectively pretty excellent in terms of taking Bournemouth into the Premier League and keeping them there. But it's a very different sort of job to the job at Arsenal, Yeah,
no, I agree. And it's sometimes, you think back to transfer rumours that we have had in the past, where you go, Arsenal are going to buy a defender from Southampton, and you go, where's Southampton, really? Is that where we should be buying players for? And then Toby Alderweireld goes on and becomes one of the best Premier League centre-halves at Tottenham. So I wonder if there is sometimes a bit of snobbery in the way that we think about things and who the potential candidates are. It's a vague thing and it's a weird thing, and it's hard to quantify, but having gone down this Emery rabbit hole and having lost sight of who we are as a football club in a fairly significant way, I do feel like we need somebody who understands what Arsenal should be and what it should strive to be. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's why I think it's interesting we have Vieira's name out there, because he was part of the very best Arsenal that most of us have ever seen in our lives. I feel like someone like Arteta is being thrown around as a candidate. Maybe doesn't have quite the same experience as Vieira in terms of success at Arsenal, but did come into a club that was, really on the brink of having the arse fall out of it after that 8-2 and that terrible summer with Fabregas and Nasri and all that kind of stuff, and came in with Mertesacker and had a really big impact in both stabilising the club helping it achieve top 4 season after season, winning trophies again after so many years of not winning trophies. So I do think he is an interesting candidate in that regard. And I see people say, well, it's mental to countenance the idea of appointing somebody who's never managed a game. And I get that. On a logical level, I get that. But Emery managed lots of games, and it didn't work with him. So it's just really difficult to say, this is the guy we should go for because I think he's going to do blah, blah, blah. It's gut feeling kind of stuff.
There is luck involved, isn't there? Like you can make a rational choice on, I think this guy is the right guy, but sometimes it will work, and I think most of the time it kind of doesn't work. You know, what is a successful managerial stint? I mean, not that many managers are extraordinary successes. They're all trying to get it right, and to a certain extent you just sort of keep pulling the lever until you get the one who is right. Certainly that's the modern football way anyway. I mean, yeah, it will be fascinating to see if and when Arsenal do eventually make a change, what route they go down. I think Arteta's an interesting candidate as well. I've said that several times. I do think our sort of capacity to get him depends entirely on what he knows about his future at Manchester City.
Or what he knows about how Arsenal is being run.
Yeah, maybe. That could be another issue. I mean, that's the thing. One of the things about Vieira is that he's sort of gettable, isn't he? I mean, it's not like it'll be a big step up for him. I mean, there are kind of marquee managers like Ten Hag or, you know, I don't know, Nagelsmann. But I think, you know, our capacity to get that sort of coach, I think, is quite slim.
It is, really. Particularly mid-season. But the reality is that I don't think we're not in a position to wait until the end of the season to get exactly the right man, if you know what I mean. We have to try and get something out of this season. We have to. Yeah. And like, while I think we'll accept that a top 4 finish is going to be something of a long shot, a very, very long shot. There is still a pathway into the Champions League via the Europa League as well. I think I had a question here actually about that. Let me just see. Gary M, who's at GazMC10, says, is the club now just keeping Emery because of his Europa League record, with the fact that winning it is probably our best shot at Champions League football for next season? I mean, yeah. I don't know that really can be a consideration, because I don't know that your domestic season can go as badly as this without it impacting your European season as well. So then it's a question of, you know, if you're getting a manager in, do you get somebody with a track record of winning something, or go with somebody who you think has the potential to do it? And I think, you know, I know we talked about money earlier, and can we afford to pay Emery off? And obviously we can, but I do think the financial side of things as well will have an impact on the manager that we're willing to hire, because we're not going to give a 3 or 4 year contract to Allegri on the kind of money that he would demand, given the track record that he has, because that's a big payoff if it doesn't work out. So I think there'll be a financial element in the decision that we make about, you know, who we bring in.
Well, and also if they're already at a club, you know, we might have to pay a significant chunk of change to get them out, and that might be something that they consider. I mean, there's a lot of talk about a potential caretaker, and Unai Emery on Twitter says, hey guys, do you fear replacing Unai with Freddie/Bold would not give the squad an adequate lift or bring a new manager bounce, because they may be perceived to be part of the status quo/old regime and not something fresh?
Potentially, certainly with regards to Steve Bold, because, you know, he's been part of the first team squad, or was part of the first team coaching staff for a long time. But I don't think realistically Steve Bold is in the frame. I think he's happy doing what he's doing with the under-23s. And if he was asked to step in for a couple of games, maybe he would do that. But I don't think he would be called upon as, you know, caretaker manager till the end of the season. Freddie, I guess it depends what the reputation he has among the players is. You probably have a better view of this than I do, because you're literally inside the stadium. But quite regularly or quite often in recent times, we've seen Freddie on the sidelines giving instructions to players coming over to him looking for instructions. Is that something you've noticed?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in fairness, it's not something that's sort of an insurgence against Emery. It's something Emery knows about and is comfortable with. But I think particularly with the younger players, I mean, if Reece Nelson or Bukayo Saka is coming on, it's Freddie giving them instructions primarily on the touchline. And I have to say, this weekend it was Freddie jumping up and arguing with the fourth official and getting very involved. I mean, we've seen him get a yellow card this season, haven't we, for his frustrations. But yeah, he's very involved, and in the warm-ups he's very involved. He tends to work with 2 or 3 players, and before the game in the dressing room, different coaches will be sort of set up to talk to different players and detail their instructions, so not everything comes through Emery and people feel there's an individual approach. And Freddie's a really big part of that, and I think he is popular, and I think he is liked. I mean, if Unai Emery is sacked during this podcast, presumably Freddie is the man who would take immediate charge. I mean, I've just seen a tweet from David Ornstein saying that the club expects Emery to be in charge on Thursday. So I don't think we're. Well, listen. At least we won't have to re-record the whole podcast. That's the small mercies, eh?
Yeah. The club expect him to be in charge. What does that mean?
To be fair, I've paraphrased. Check what he actually said. David Ornstein. So, Emery in charge Thursday as things stand, which in fairness can mean something or nothing, can't it?
As things stand, yeah.
I mean, I don't... Do you think he'll be sacked this week? I don't.
Well, I don't, but I still... It fills me with despair. Yeah.
Sure. I get that. But I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, it is interesting, I think that we won't hear, to borrow their phrase, similar noises from the club to what we heard after the Leicester game. I think they must realise...
They'll keep their fucking mouths shut now.
Yeah, I think they must realise the degree to which that backfired. So that will lead to a degree of uncertainty, I suppose. But, I don't know. What are we talking about? Something terrible.
Something awful, yeah.
Let's have a look. Likes. Blah, 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 blah. Wow. We haven't talked about the "We care, do you" statement. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, maybe it'll prompt a response. Maybe. I'm not sure though. I mean, look. I think as people who care very deeply about this football club, I'm not talking simply about "we care, do you" or anything like that. I just mean as fans, how long can you sit back without saying something when things are going as poorly as they are? Whether they pay any attention to it, I'm not sure.
Well, what about this from Roger Barra, who says, what is the best and most productive way for us supporters to show our dissatisfaction and indeed fear of what may happen if nothing changes? It comes up a lot, that.
It does, and I feel uncomfortable answering that question because it's not for me to tell anyone how they should support the club, how they should behave, what they should do. You see people talking about, well, fans should get together and boycott. And that kind of stuff. But I'm in no position to tell anyone to do that. If some of the groups, like Red Action or Black Scarf or groups which are there as representatives of fans want to go down that road, well, that's up to them. But me as a guy with a podcast and a website, I can't tell anyone what they should do. I can't tell people don't go to the games. You've paid for your tickets. You can do what you want. I think we'll see just naturally as this continues, people will make their feelings known by not going to the games. And that is the biggest marker of fan discontent that there will ever be, Like, we can moan all day. We can moan all day on social media, and we can talk about it on podcasts or videos or whatever it might be. But if Arsenal play a Premier League game in a half-full stadium, that tells you the way fans are really, really feeling. I mean, what do you think the attendance is going to be on Thursday?
Apparently the club expects 40,000 there. I would be shocked if they get that many.
I'm just trying to see. The lowest attendance at a I like this, Emirates Stadium. The lowest attendance at the ground is believed to be 25,909 for a match against Bate Borisov in the Europa League on December 7th, 2017. However, the official attendance for the game is recorded as 54,648. I
think we'll give that a run for its money.
I think it will, won't it? Yeah. I mean, Frankfurt maybe a little bit more of a draw than Bate Borisov, but I think it's going to be a half-empty stadium. And I know you can dismiss it as Europa League, but that this brings us back around full circle to why we need to be in the Champions League. Because if it was a Wednesday night and Arsenal were facing Barcelona or one of Europe's other big exciting teams, that would be a full stadium.
Of course, and I actually think even if the first team were going well in the Premier League and there was a sort of buzz around the club, there were plenty of times when those sorts of games, Carling Cup games, were full, weren't they? Because people wanted to see the next generation, and people, I suppose, still felt pretty positively about what was going on. I think you're right. Empty seats speak for themselves. I think they, to a certain extent, did for Arsene Wenger. I think the same could happen here. I thought James Benge actually made quite a good point on Twitter where he said it's easy to say fans should boycott, but unless you're paying for those tickets, do you know what I mean? It's sort of like it's costing you 50 quid a game to boycott almost. So, it's not as straightforward as all that. I can understand people wanting to get some return on their money. But I do think that just generally there will be that sort of apathy that will creep in, and that will happen against Frankfurt and probably in the home game that follows. So, some sort of coordinated protest is very difficult to do, isn't it? And people have such split feelings, as I witnessed firsthand on Saturday. People have such split feelings on what is appropriate within the stadium and what is not, that I don't really want to get into kind of condoning that and advising people on what they should do. It's an individual thing, unfortunately, and that means it's very difficult to coordinate. But things like the "We Care Do You" statement, I think, if you feel that is emblematic of your feelings as a fan, I don't think there's any harm in sharing that and showing that a bit like that petition that very quickly racked up signatures in the summer. It's a way of demonstrating sort of the scale of dissatisfaction quite swiftly. We have a question here, a non-Emery related question from Cluck the Rotisserie Chicken on the Discord. And he says, we soon have the January transfer window open, and while we potentially have some players leaving, do you think we'll have any incoming players, and do we need it? I think this is quite an interesting thing to consider, because we're basically, a month away, just over a month away from the transfer window opening again. If you do bring in a new manager, they'll want something. They'll want something, won't they? So is there the possibility that this decision is being delayed, so the club don't have to spend in January? I mean, that's an interesting question. I would hope not. I mean, we refused to spend in January last year beyond the Denis Suarez thing, and I think it hurt us ultimately. I think it arguably cost us top four. So I think we need to... If we get a guy in and he says, I need this, you need to back him. You need to do that. And I think it's inevitable that a manager might look at this squad and say, I need a centre-half now. And it would be very difficult to argue with that, I think, based on what we've seen so far this season. And as I said earlier in the show, I still think central midfield is a massive problem in this squad. So, I mean, do we need players in January? Probably. Are we likely to get them? I think it depends on if there's a new manager or not. Certainly, if it's still Emery, I think then we can sort of assume they've sort of written off the Premier League campaign. And I don't think that they'll spend money in that instance.
No, I mean, they must know that, you know, he's a dead man walking. So you don't give that guy money to buy players that a new guy might not want, you know?
I mean...
isn't the structure, though, set up in a way which, you know, basically is the club buys the players now?
True.
And whoever's head coach has to deal with...
Well, maybe the club feel an incoming head coach might do a better job with your David Luiz or your Lucas Torreira or whoever it is.
You're everyone.
You're everyone. You're anyone. Yes, possibly. I mean, it is just sort of... We're on a bit of a hamster wheel, aren't we, at the moment? You know, it's kind of... We're kind of spinning our wheels here. And as we do, we're getting further away from where we want to be.
Yeah.
I desperately hope there's some brilliant plan that I can't see. But it's very difficult to maintain that level of faith, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
It is difficult. And the funny thing is, like, that is what supporters want. I think supporters ultimately want to believe in their club. Like, I talked about that thing of sort of, you know, celebrating after the draw, but that's because they believe in the direction. And you want to be supporting, you know, we don't want to be making the decisions. We want to believe in the people who are making them.
Yeah.
And that's... You know, that's what's difficult to maintain. I think that we spoke about this last week, but that trust has been so eroded. And now, you know, it's opened up all those questions again. And I think maybe we don't realise that as fans, that sometimes we're happiest when we just trust people. I mean, we made a sort of habit of it for 15 years saying Arsene knows. And we were pretty content. The idea that you've got people running the club who ultimately you believe in is actually very satisfying as a supporter and makes the whole thing less stressful for you, because you're not trying to enact changes. You're not demanding they give the captaincy to somebody else, or you're not demanding they pick this player in his correct position, because you believe in those people in those roles. I think that's comforting, and that's like what supporting should feel like, really.
So... Final question, because we're going to have to call time on this, because I've got lots to do today and we've been going for nearly 2 hours.
Right.
Do you believe in the people that are running Arsenal right now? Or if that's a bit too binary, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not much belief at all and 10 is all the belief in the world, where would you stand right now on, if I made you pick a number between 1 and 10, what is it?
Well, look, it's the prerogative of the supporter to vacillate, and after the summer, you know, I would have been high on that scale. I would have been...
Where would you have been on the summer? You know, let's say after the summer, start of the new season, we brought in these players, they've talked a good talk, there's optimism, there's hope. How high up the scale would you have been?
Maybe like an 8. I
think I probably would have been a 7, but, you know, it's a good 7, a solid 7.
I think I would have been an 8, and I think that was contingent, and I talked and wrote about this a lot, on the idea that, you know, even if there were doubts over the manager, I felt like there was signs that there was something in place that made a change in the head coach sort of easy, and something that we could survive quite straightforwardly. And, you know, I felt that that's what would happen if necessary. Now, obviously... some of my doubts and concerns have been opened up. I suppose I've dropped to... I don't know. Not as low as some. I'm not sort of like... I'm not in a position where I think, you know, Don Raoul's actually a clown and he doesn't know anything. I'm not in that place. I guess I'm like a 4, maybe. Right. But it's a big drop.
It is a big drop. 8 to 4, that's like... If there was a hit single... They go the other way, though, don't they?
But I, you know, I'm a fan, and my emotions mean that things change all the time.
Sure.
And if they pulled something out of the bag and I was like, oh, why didn't I see? That's what they were planning this whole time. They just needed to wait for that to happen, I reserve the right to go back up to a 7. And I want to. I really want to, because then I feel like I've got a club that I can believe in and support. I mean, what about you? Would you put a number on it?
Right now, I would be 3. And I was thinking about 2. I think it's one thing for your football club to have a manager who isn't doing what you want him to do. I think we can all rationalize that and come to terms with that, because that's a performance thing. But I think the worst thing for me over the last number of weeks is coming to not a conclusion, but becoming increasingly fearful that the people who are running the football side of Arsenal are just as bad, or as performing as badly as the manager. Like, the manager could be terrible, but if you have faith in the people who are making the decisions, then it becomes less stressful. Whereas over the last few weeks, I've become much more disinclined to believe in Raul and the work that he's doing as head of football, because as I said earlier, he is presiding over this mess. He is allowing it to continue. So while I want Emery to go, I've got less faith than I did in the people who are going to make the decision to replace him, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I completely understand that, and I think I share a lot of those fears as well. My only, and listen, we had this conversation earlier in the season about sort of optimism, and ultimately my optimism was ill-founded, but it is in my nature as a fan. I was positively surprised in the summer, and I could be positively surprised again if what comes out of this somehow makes sense in the way that the summer did. And I really hope that's the case. My fear is that any outcome will still have been too slow, too late, and too costly.
Yeah.
That is my big fear. And yeah, that's a worry. Because we just want reasons to feel good and feel positive, and for this to feel fun. Yeah. And I think the sooner the club acts on that, the better it will be towards returning to that place.
Yeah, right. Well, look, it's not there at the moment. Who knows when it will be again? Hopefully sooner rather than later. We're going to leave it there because we've been going. We will have another Arsecast Extra for you on Friday because we're playing Thursday night against Frankfurt. Are you going? You'll be one of the 7 or 8 people there?
I'm not working, so that will be in my hands, I guess, if I go or not. Something to think about, genuinely. I've got to find the motivation. I imagine I will be there.
All right.
I invariably am, but yeah.
You could do that wonderful thing of stretching out across a number of seats and having a nice lie down while you watch the game.
Yeah,
anyway.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, look, thank you as ever for listening. Sorry we haven't been able to cheer you up. Sorry that during this podcast there hasn't been a revelation from on high that's made most of the podcast redundant. Might come shortly after this, but it doesn't seem like it. We'll catch you on Friday. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.